How to destroy a bad habit without willpower. Have you ever made a promise to yourself that felt absolutely real in the moment? You looked in the mirror and said, "This is it. Tomorrow is different." You deleted the app. You threw away the cigarettes. You hid the junk food. You bought the notebook. You bought the gym membership. You believed with every fiber of your being that this time was going to be different. And then a few days later, maybe a week if you were lucky, you found yourself doing the very thing you promised you would never do again. Tell me, has that ever happened to you? Because if it has, I want you to know something from the very beginning. The problem isn't that you're weak. The problem isn't that you don't care enough. And the problem certainly isn't that you're somehow destined to repeat the same cycle forever. The problem is much simpler than that. You've been fighting the wrong battle. Most people believe that bad habits are defeated through force. They believe the stronger person wins. They believe success belongs to the individual with the greatest self-control. So every morning they wake up and prepare for war against themselves. Think about how exhausting that sounds. Imagine waking up every single day and believing that your greatest enemy is the person staring back at you in the mirror. Imagine believing that every victory requires suffering, every improvement requires struggle, and every step forward demands that you constantly overpower your own mind. How long could anyone keep fighting like that? Not forever, because eventually the soldier gets tired. And when exhaustion arrives, the habit is still there, waiting patiently. You see, bad habits are incredibly patient. They don't panic, they don't argue, they don't need to convince you. They simply wait for the moment when you're stressed, when you're lonely, when you're disappointed, when you've had a long day, when life becomes just difficult enough that your brain reaches for what feels familiar. That's why willpower loses. Not because it doesn't exist, because it expires. Have you ever noticed that the decisions you regret rarely happen when life feels easy? Nobody finishes an amazing vacation and suddenly thinks, you know what? Today is the perfect day to ruin my progress. It happens after rejection. It happens after failure. It happens after boredom. It happens after emotional pain. The habit isn't solving your problem. It's responding to your emotion. And if you only attack the behavior while ignoring the emotion, you're treating the smoke while leaving the fire untouched. Think about that for a moment. What if the habit you've been trying to destroy isn't actually your biggest problem? What if it's your brain's best attempt to protect you? Maybe not in a healthy way, maybe not in a productive way, but protection nonetheless, because every habit begins with a promise, not a spoken promise, a silent one. I'll make you feel better. That's the promise. Scrolling promises escape, overeating promises comfort, procrastination promises relief, anger promises control, distraction promises numbness. Every bad habit whispers exactly what you want to hear in the exact moment you're most vulnerable. And here's what makes it dangerous. Sometimes it keeps its promise for 5 minutes, for 10 minutes, maybe even an hour. The problem is that it always sends the bill later. Temporary comfort becomes permanent frustration. Temporary relief becomes lasting regret. Temporary pleasure becomes years of feeling stuck. And suddenly, you're not just fighting the habit anymore, you're fighting the version of yourself you've started believing you are. That's where the real damage happens. Because eventually people stop saying, I have a bad habit. They start saying, I am a lazy person. I am undisciplined. I am addicted. I never finish anything. Do you hear the difference? One describes behavior, the other defines identity. And the moment behavior becomes identity, change becomes incredibly difficult because people naturally protect who they believe they are. If you believe you're always late, you'll keep finding reasons to be late. If you believe you're unhealthy, you'll keep making unhealthy choices. If you believe you lack discipline, you'll keep collecting evidence that proves you're right. Not because it's true, because your mind is constantly trying to remain consistent with the story it believes. So maybe the question isn't, how do I stop this habit? Maybe the better question is, who would I become if this habit no longer existed? Because habits don't just occupy your time. They occupy your identity, and identities are powerful things. Years ago, researchers discovered something fascinating about human behavior. People rarely make decisions based only on logic. They make decisions based on belonging. We become like the environments we spend time in, like the conversations we repeat, like the expectations that surround us. If every person around you normalizes complaining, complaining begins to feel normal. If everyone around you avoids responsibility, responsibility starts to feel unusual. If everyone around you reaches for distraction whenever life becomes uncomfortable, your brain quietly learns that discomfort should always be escaped, not because someone taught you, because someone modeled it. That's how habits spread, silently, patently, almost invisibly. Now here's the beautiful part. The same principle that built the habit can destroy it, because environments create behaviors more consistently than motivation ever will. Think about how strange it is that we expect ourselves to change while refusing to change the environment that's teaching us who to be every single day. We say we want to stop eating unhealthy food while filling our kitchen with temptation. We say we want to read more while spending hours surrounded by endless digital distractions. We say we want peace while constantly consuming anxiety. Then we blame ourselves. But imagine planting a flower in poisoned soil. Would you blame the flower? Or would you change the soil? The environment matters more than most people realize. Your surroundings are having conversations with your brain every second. Your phone is talking, your desk is talking, your bedroom is talking, your schedule is talking. The people around you are talking. Everything around you is constantly suggesting what kind of person you should become. The real question is, are you listening to voices that build you or voices that slowly dismantle you? Because every choice becomes easier when your environment quietly supports it. And every choice becomes harder when your environment quietly resists it. That's why lasting change often looks surprisingly ordinary. It isn't dramatic, it isn't loud, it isn't heroic. It's someone deciding not to keep temptation within arm's reach. It's someone deciding to spend more time with people who inspire growth instead of excuses. It's someone deciding that the easiest choice in the room should also be the healthiest one. Small decisions, invisible decisions, the kind nobody applauds. But those quiet decisions have a remarkable way of shaping extraordinary lives. The world celebrates dramatic transformations. But life is built by ordinary moments repeated long enough to become a new normal. And maybe that's encouraging, because it means you don't have to become a completely different person overnight. You only have to stop giving your old identity so many opportunities to stay alive. Look around for just a moment. Not at the person sitting beside you, not at the stage. Look at your own life. Picture your bedroom. Picture your kitchen. Picture your office. Picture the route you take to work every morning. Picture the chair where you always sit, the screen you always unlock, the notifications that constantly interrupt your attention, the people you spend your evenings with, and the routines that quietly repeat themselves day after day. Now let me ask you a question. How many of your decisions are actually your decisions? We love to believe we're in control. We love the idea that every action comes from determination, discipline, and conscious choice. We tell ourselves that tomorrow will finally become more focused, healthier, calmer, more productive, more patient. We make promises fueled by emotion, convinced that our future will be shaped by stronger intentions. But intentions don't build your life. Environments do every single day. Your surroundings are making decisions before you ever get the chance to. They are silently guiding your attention, influencing your emotions, shaping your habits, and deciding what feels normal. Most of the time, you don't even notice it's happening because the strongest influences are often the quietest ones. Think about this. Have you ever walked into a room and completely forgotten why you were there? Then you step back into the previous room and suddenly you remembered. Nothing magical happened. Your memory wasn't broken. Your environment changed, and with it, your mind changed. The space itself triggered different thoughts. If a single doorway can influence your memory, imagine what your daily environment is doing to your future. Imagine waking up every morning in a place designed for distraction. Your phone is the first thing within reach. Notifications are waiting. Social media is one tap away. The television is always ready. Snacks are sitting on the counter. Every object around you is inviting you toward comfort instead of growth. Then you wonder why discipline feels so difficult. It's like trying to swim against a powerful current while blaming yourself for not moving faster. The truth is, your environment is always pulling you in a direction. The only question is whether it's pulling you toward the person you want to become or the person you've always been. Most people spend years trying to change themselves without ever changing the conditions that keep recreating the same version of them. They buy another planner. They watch another motivational video. They wait for Monday, then the next Monday, then the first day of the next month, then January. They're constantly searching for a better version of themselves while living inside an environment that keeps rewarding the old one. Imagine trying to grow a healthy tree in poisoned soil. Every morning you water it. Every afternoon you protect it from the sun. Every evening you hope tomorrow will be different. Months pass and the tree barely grows. Would you blame the tree? Or would you finally examine the soil? That's exactly what so many people do with their lives. They criticize themselves for failing without questioning the environment they're growing in. They call themselves lazy while living in constant distraction. They call themselves inconsistent while surrounding themselves with inconsistency. They call themselves weak while placing temptation within arm's reach every hour of the day. What if you've been asking the wrong question all along? Instead of asking, how can I become more disciplined? What if you asked, what keeps making discipline necessary? Because the goal isn't to become someone who constantly resists temptation. The goal is to create a life where temptation no longer controls the room. Real transformation begins long before the moment of decision. It begins with design. Every successful habit you've ever developed probably felt effortless after a while. Not because you suddenly became extraordinary, but because your environment started doing some of the work for you. Think about brushing your teeth. You don't wake up every morning debating whether you'll do it. You don't need an inspirational quote. You don't negotiate with yourself. The toothbrush is where it has always been. The routine is familiar. The environment reminds you without speaking a single word. That's the hidden power of your surroundings. They eliminate decisions, and every unnecessary decision you remove creates more energy for the decisions that actually matter. Your life is filled with invisible cues. A coffee mug reminds you to make coffee. A couch invites you to sit. A notification invites you to check your phone. A television remote suggests one more episode. A messy desk encourages a distracted mind. A peaceful room encourages a peaceful mind. Nothing is neutral. Everything is teaching you something. Everything is rehearsing a future version of you. You don't become your habits overnight. You become what your environment repeatedly asks you to practice. If your surroundings repeatedly ask you to scroll, you'll become someone who scrolls. If they repeatedly ask you to rush, you'll become someone who lives in constant urgency. If they repeatedly ask you to compare yourself with everyone else, eventually you'll believe comparison is simply part of life. Without realizing it, your environment slowly becomes your identity. That's why changing yourself feels impossible, while changing your surroundings often feels surprisingly effective. You don't need to fight every battle. Sometimes you simply need to stop walking onto the battlefield. Imagine someone trying to quit eating unhealthy food while keeping cupboards filled with temptation. Every evening becomes another exhausting test of self-control. Eventually they give in, not because they're incapable of change, but because they're asking willpower to compete against constant exposure. Now imagine the same person making one simple adjustment. The unhealthy options disappear. Healthy choices become easier to reach. Suddenly, the battle becomes quieter. The number of difficult decisions decreases. Progress no longer depends entirely on motivation. Nothing about that person changed overnight. The environment changed first. And when the environment changed, different behaviors became easier to repeat. This principle reaches far beyond food. If your phone is always beside you, distraction becomes normal. If your workspace is always chaotic, scattered thinking becomes normal. If your closest conversations revolve around excuses, excuses begin sounding reasonable. If negativity is constantly surrounding you, optimism starts feeling unrealistic. Human beings are remarkably adaptable. We absorb expectations without even realizing we're absorbing them. We imitate emotional patterns, communication styles, daily routines, and standards from the world around us. We don't simply live in our environment. Eventually, our environment begins living inside us. That's why the people you spend time with matter so much. Their standards quietly become your standards. Their habits slowly influence your habits. Their attitude toward challenges gradually shapes your own. You may think you're making independent decisions, but every conversation leaves a small imprint. Every repeated interaction nudges your thinking in one direction or another. And over time, those tiny nudges become the story of your life. The remarkable thing is that lasting change doesn't always require dramatic action. Sometimes it begins with something so small that nobody else would notice it. A different morning routine, a cleaner workspace, a book placed where the phone used to be, a walk replacing 10 minutes of endless scrolling, one conversation that inspires instead of drains, one commitment that changes what your environment asks of you every single day.